Hi guys, it's Michelle, and today's video is going to be yet another unsolved mysteries video for you guys. I always think that unsolved mysteries are really important to talk about because obviously somewhere out there somebody knows the answers, and I just think like putting more attention on the cases that haven't been solved yet is really important. So without further ado, let's get into it. We're gonna start with a case that you guys have probably heard of, and it is the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. This case is like, I would say solved. Like, we know who did it. We know sort of what happened, but I truly think we'll never know the entire truth of the case because this man who is responsible is just a chronic fucking liar and just the worst, most vile human being. He makes me sick. So, but I wanted to talk about the case because I've never covered it on my channel before, and it's obviously a pretty popular case that you guys have probably heard of, especially if you were born in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the disappearance of Natalee Holloway took place in 2005 during a high school graduation trip to Aruba. It has become one of the most infamous unsolved cases of the 21st century, and over the past 2 decades, there have been misleading information and false confessions and so many different details that make this case just so much more frustrating to deal with, and I cannot even imagine being this girl's parents. That would just rip my heart out. Like, that's so horrible. But let's talk a bit about Natalee first. She was born on October 21st of 1986 in Clinton, Mississippi. Natalee was the eldest child of Dave and Beth Holloway, and after her parents got divorced, she primarily lived with her mother but still maintained a close relationship with her father. Natalee was a super smart girl. She attended the Mountain Brook High School, and she always participated in a bunch of extracurricular activities. She was just super hardworking and actually earned herself a full scholarship. She was going to the University of Alabama the next year on a full ride to study pre-med, so she was going to become a doctor. In late May of 2005, Natalee joined 124 of her classmates on a graduation trip to Aruba. So of course her parents were like a little apprehensive about letting her go, but ultimately it's the early 2000s. Things are like a little different. There was going to be chaperones. Like, it theoretically should have been safe for Natalee to go and for these students to endure this vacation. But you have to note that these kids are 17, 18 years old. They're allowed to drink in Aruba, which they're obviously not allowed to do in the United States. Things are gonna go a little crazy. Like, I just feel like that is expected. But it seemed like these kids were having the time of their lives celebrating their graduation from high school. That was until May 29th, 2005, when Natalee and her friends went to a popular nightclub called Carlos and Charlie's in Aruba. She met 17-year-old Joran Vandersloot, a Dutch national who had lived on the island for a very long time. He pretty much considered himself to be a local. Joran had kind of a reputation around Aruba for partying with the tourists, and also he was accompanied by his 2 friends, brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. Natalee was last seen leaving the club around 1:30 a.m. on May 30th with Joran and the Kalpo brothers. I guess no one really thought anything of it at the time, like she was just going off with some people that she had met, but ultimately things started to get scary on the morning of May 30th when her friends realized that Natalee never returned to the hotel that night. Her friends pretty immediately raised the alarm, and Beth Holloway, Natalee's mother, was called, and she flew to Aruba immediately to help search for her daughter. I can't even imagine getting that phone call that your child is missing. That would just be horrendous. So again, from the beginning, we had a pretty clear suspect of the last person who saw Natalee Holloway alive, which was Joran Vandersloot and the Kalpo brothers. So basically kind of a lot happened during this time. They kept lying, basically. At first they said that they left the club at 1:30 a.m., hung out for a bit, and then dropped Natalee off at her hotel, the Holiday Inn, that night, and that was the last time they saw her. However, the surveillance footage proves that there was no Kalpo brothers, no Joran Vandersloot, and no Natalee at the Holiday Inn that night. So obviously immediately this raised the flags of the people who are working on this case, because why would you lie about where you were going with this missing girl? Then Yoron said that he and Natalie drove to the Marriott Hotel near the beach, and he made some advances towards her, but she resisted, and he claimed that he left her on the beach, but was too embarrassed to admit that he left a girl alone on the beach, and so that's why he lied the first time. Ultimately, Yoron and the Kalpoe brothers were arrested on June 9th of 2005, but they were released a few days later because there was a lack of evidence. And even though the search continued, there was no trace of Natalie, and there was no evidence that really linked them directly to something sinister that could have happened. Because yes, they were the last people that saw her, but there was nothing that linked them to her death or disappearance, kidnapping, whatever it may be. Although, like, in my opinion, there obviously was evidence, but in a court of law, that wasn't gonna hold up. Natalie's mother, Beth Holloway, remained very consistent throughout the entirety of the last 20 years of her trying to convict Yoron of murdering her daughter. She was firmly believed that that was the case. She just knew in her heart that there was something off about him and that he was the one that the police needed to be looking at. So she was very upset when they were released from prison, and she made it her life duty to get this man behind bars. Unfortunately for investigators, Yoron just was known for being a fucking liar. He was very notorious about lying and giving different false accounts about what happened to Natalie. Over the years, he's claimed a variety of things. Like, he left her on the beach because she rejected him. At another point, she had a seizure and collapsed, so he panicked and left her there. He even told people that he had sold Natalie into a human trafficking ring. And none of these stories were ever corroborated by proof, so we were just like, girl, what the fuck? He just kept yapping and saying that he had done all of these things, but no one knew what actually happened. In 2008, Yoron attempted to extort money from Beth. Basically, he offered to reveal the location of Natalie's body in exchange for $250,000. Now, Beth was desperate for answers at this point, of course, so she wired him $25,000 up front, and Yoron provided some information about how he buried Natalie's remains in a house's foundation in Aruba. But the investigators ended up excavating the property, and there were no remains found. So he had literally just made that up and literally just extorted $25,000 from the mother of the person that he more than likely murdered, which is just sadistic. But again, Beth Holloway never gave up on getting Joran van der Sloot in prison. But unfortunately, the authorities were just too late because everything got pretty escalated on May 30th of 2010, exactly 5 years after Natalie Holloway's disappearance, when Joran murdered 21-year-old Stephanie Flores in a hotel room in Peru. This was a pretty clear-cut case. There was a video footage of Joran meeting Stephanie Flores, and her body was discovered in Joran's hotel room, so it was pretty clear what had happened. He attempted to flee the country, but in 2012 he was convicted of her murder and sentenced to 28 years in a Peruvian prison. So now, after Joran was arrested for this, he also became liable for the extortion case against Beth Holloway, and in order for him to kind of take the plea deal, he basically had to offer information about what had happened to Natalie. And so part of the deal was that he would detail what happened on that night of May 30th, 2005. And in October 2023, he allegedly confessed again, where he said that after leaving Carlos and Charlie's with Natalie, they went to the beach where he attempted to initiate sexual contact, and Natalie resisted, telling him no and pushing him away. And in response, Joran violently kicked her in the face and then found a nearby cinder block and beat her to death with it. And then panicked, he dragged her body into the ocean. If that's actually what happened, just because of how much Joran has lied over the years, it's hard to believe a word he says. Obviously, this makes sense, though, because it would corroborate the fact that there was no body ever found. But I don't know, I just feel like there would maybe be some more evidence of this. Also, why was there a cinder block on the beach? I don't know, I've never been to Aruba, so I don't know if that's like a common occurrence. But van der Sloot's confession, I think, really helped Natalie's family feel at ease. So I'm happy for that, at least. But I do think that it's a little scary that he is going to get out of prison. He was only sentenced to 28 years in prison, which means, depending on good behavior, he'll be in his 50s and 60s by the time he gets out, which is not fucking good. This man should never be able to walk the earth again. Like, he needs to be in jail. Like, I truly believe he will kill again, and I just think it's kind of absurd. And the real reason for that is because the statute of limitations, the fact that there is a statute of limitations on murder in Aruba is pretty fucking crazy, but it's 12 years. So since Natalie disappeared in 2005, the window to prosecute Vandersloot for the murder of Natalie Holloway ended in 2017. So this confession, it was just there for part of the plea deal and does not affect his, like, sentencing whatsoever, because he can't be prosecuted for that, which is nuts. Again, I just feel like after 20 years of searching for answers, it's really upsetting to me that he's going to be out of prison at some point. Especially when you see the people, again, we just did a video about the Menendez brothers. The fact that they got life in prison is insane. Like, the fact that this fucker literally is just murdering innocent girls, multiple that we know of. Who knows? I just cannot believe that people like him don't get locked up for life or whatever, but like the Menendez brothers are in prison for life. Like, it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. The justice system makes no sense to me because I feel like it's so backwards in certain ways. But anyway, that is the case of Natalie Holloway. Let me know what you guys think on this. I don't know. I do think that for the most part, it's pretty solved. Like, we definitely know that Yoron had a hand in whatever it is that happened to Natalie, but I don't think we'll ever know the full story. And that's just, like, really unfortunate. But I'm happy he's behind bars, and I wish he was there for longer. So, I don't know. But let me know your guys' thoughts. All right, the next unsolved case that we're going to be talking about is the disappearance of Brianna Maitland. Brianna Maitland is a 17-year-old girl who disappeared on March 19th of 2004. And this case remains one of the most perplexing unsolved cases that I have ever seen. Like, it is very, very strange, but let's get into it. So Brianna Maitland grew up in Franklin County, Vermont, and she was described as a very intelligent and independent young woman. Her high school years were marked with a bit of challenges. By her sophomore year, she ended up choosing to move out of her mom's home. She ended up moving in with one of her friends, Jillian Stout, and she dropped out of high school but enrolled in a GED program. She just was done with school. She wanted to just get a job and move on with her life. She had 2 jobs at the time, one at the Black Lantern Inn as a dishwasher and another as a waitress at KJ Diner. And honestly, before she disappeared, she seemed to really be making progress towards her goals, and she had plans to attend a community college, and she really just had big plans for herself. The last day that Brianna was seen was on March 19th of 2004, and the day started off well, pretty normal. She went to take her GED exam and she passed, so she was really excited about that. So she went to have lunch with her mother, Kelly, to celebrate. And the two spent the afternoon shopping and running errands. Her mom claims that at one point, Brianna abruptly left the store for like a minute because she saw something outside that unsettled her. Her mom kind of believes that she saw someone that she met up with outside, and then they had an altercation, and then when she came back, she just was different. Her vibe was off. She just had something like unsettling about her. But ultimately, after shopping, Kelly dropped off her daughter at the Black Lantern Inn for her evening shift, which began at 3:30 p.m. Brianna worked until around 11:20 p.m. and actually declined her coworker's offer to go to dinner that night, and she just decided to go home. She mentioned to her coworkers that the reason was because it was kind of late and she had to rest for her second job early the next morning. Now, the next afternoon on March 20th, a Vermont state trooper found Brianna's car abandoned about a mile from the Black Lantern Inn, and her car was oddly backed into the side of an old abandoned farmhouse known as the Dutchburn House. The rear of the car had crashed into the building, and basically the car was just left there. The trooper looked inside and found medication and personal belongings of Brianna Maitland, so that's how they knew whose car it was. But instead of reporting it, which confuses me, the trooper just assumed that she had gotten in an accident because she was drunk driving, because apparently that was common. to just like leave the car abandoned. So he had the car towed to a local garage. He tried to go to Brianna's place of work at the Black Lantern Inn, but she wasn't there. So ultimately, no, I don't know. He didn't contact the parents. I have no clue why. Several days actually passed before anyone really noticed that Brianna was missing, because she was living with her roommate Jillian, who had been out of town for the weekend. So she didn't even realize that Brianna hadn't come home until she returned home on March 22nd. But at first, Jillian just assumed that maybe she was staying at her parents' house or something. So she waited until the next day, March 23rd, to contact her mother and ask if she had seen her. And her mom obviously immediately freaked out, because you're telling me my daughter's not home, but she's also not here. So yeah. And immediately they filed a missing persons report. And it wasn't until March 25th, 6 days after Brianna disappeared, that the police ended up showing her parents a picture of the car that they found at the Dutchburn house. And her parents immediately identified the vehicle as Brianna's, and also just immediately knew that something was wrong. So some information came forward after it was realized that Brianna was missing. For example, one of the most puzzling pieces of evidence to me, and I kind of think this person could be responsible for something, is the fact that Brianna's ex-boyfriend James actually saw Brianna's car on the early mornings of March 20th. He claimed that he was partying in Canada that night and drove past the Dutchburn house around 4 a.m. and he recognized Brianna's car in that state but didn't see anyone around it. And according to his account, the headlights were still on and both the driver's and passenger's doors were open. And instead of reporting this to the police or calling his ex-girlfriend, he decided to turn off the headlights and close both doors and left. Like that, he just left. And I don't understand this at all. He claims that it's because he had been drinking that night and he was scared to get in trouble for drinking and driving, so that's why he didn't report what he saw. But I do feel like that's a pretty ridiculous claim, you know? There's really not many theories when it comes to what could have happened to Brianna, because we have like basically nothing left behind. No evidence. But one of the earliest and most persistent theories is that there was some drug involvement related to foul play. So Brianna was reportedly acquainted with two local men who were involved in selling drugs, Raymond Ryans and Nathaniel Jackson. An anonymous tip led the investigators to search this house that Brianna was maybe being held captive in, but they didn't find her. They only found drugs and various weapons. And ultimately, no charges were ever filed against them. Another theory revolves around the fact that just 3 weeks before Brianna's disappearance, she got into a violent altercation at a party with a girl named Kaylee LaCrosse, who was a former friend, and she basically just punched Brianna in the face 3 weeks before she went missing. And the motive was apparently jealousy over her boyfriend flirting with Brianna. I don't know. So some people think that that was maybe involved in the case somehow, but ultimately LaCrosse was cleared of any involvement. A lot of people also think that Brianna could have been a victim of human trafficking or a serial killer, but again, a lot of this has been ruled out or not corroborated by really any evidence at all. Something that I want to point out is that it really reminds me of the case of Mara Murray, which Mara Murray vanished just over a month earlier on February 9th of 2004 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. So it's kind of nearby. I think they're about an hour and a half away from each other. Both women were in their late teens, early 20s, and they disappeared under very eerily similar circumstances where their cars were found crashed and abandoned. We talked about the case of Mara Murray before, and authorities don't think that the cases are connected, but I will say just the state of the way the cars were found has always made me feel weird about both of these cases, and that maybe they do have some sort of connection. Like some weird serial killer who was staging these car crashes after like obtaining their victims. I don't know. The latest news that we have about Brianna Maitland's case is that in 2022, police actually announced that there was DNA evidence found at the scene that had been tested, but it really didn't lead to any major breakthroughs. It apparently matched some of the people's profiles of potential suspects, but it never led to an arrest or anything. So this case is still completely cold and unsolved, and I don't know if it'll ever be solved because it just seems so small town negligence is the reason for this case not being solved, and that is really frustrating. Let me know your guys' thoughts and if you have any theories on what could have happened to Brianna Maitland. All right, the last case that we're going to be talking about is the murder of Jill Dando. This is an insane case. I cannot believe I've never heard of this before because it's actually nuts. So Jill Dando is one of the UK's most beloved television presenters. She was super famous before her death, and she was mostly known for her work at hosting Crime Watch, which is also interesting because she was literally like hosting, exposing different killers and unsolved mysteries and stuff. So that's weird that she turned into something that would have been on Crime Watch. Jill Dando was born on November 9th of 1961, and she was a very well-respected journalist. A lot of people compared her to Princess Diana. I will say they do look alike. Like, my parents were over the other day and I was watching this documentary on her, and my dad just like thought it was Princess Diana. And I was like, no girl, that's Jill Dando. But apparently a lot of people made those comparisons throughout the years, and she was so beautiful and like charismatic and just really was good at her job, and everyone loved her. It's pretty important to note that Jill Dando was getting married to a man named Dr. Alan Farthing, and she was living with him at the time, but she was murdered at her house. Like, she owned her own flat, and that is where she was killed, and she went there very rarely. So the person that murdered her had to know that she was going to be at her Fulham flat that day. And again, that's very strange because that would mean either this person was stalking her, which we saw security footage of Jill Dando throughout the morning and there was clearly nobody following her. Or two, this is somebody that she knew and had trusted to tell them that she was going to be in this area. So I don't know. On the morning of April 26, 1999, Jill Dando returned to her Fulham home after spending the night at her fiance's house. She went at around 11:30 a.m. to pick up some faxes, and once she got to her doorstep, she was shot at close range and killed. Despite the time of day, there was no witnesses and no people that heard the shooter, saw the shooter leave, or anything. But she was actually found by her neighbor who made the 911 call. In the days following Jill Dando's murder, obviously this shocked the UK quite a bit, but a lot of people had different theories as to what happened. One really popular theory was that there was a hitman involved, and basically that her murder was linked to her involvement in a BBC broadcast appealing for humanitarian aid during the NATO bombings, which had taken place just weeks earlier. And this theory suggested that Serbian forces or a pro-Serbian hitman may have wanted to retaliate, and that's why they killed Jill Dando. A lot of people believe that she actually had a stalker from the show Crime Watch. Obviously, Crime Watch was focused on solving very violent crimes, and so sometimes that can attract the wrong type of people, and so people believe that she could have been murdered by a fan or deranged stalker. Throughout Jill Dando's career, she had received several advances and a lot of unwanted attention. She was a very beautiful girl, and a lot of people were super fixated on her, but there was no concrete evidence that linked anyone to murdering her. Another theory is that Jill Dando had been investigating a child SA ring within the BBC, and she was killed to be silenced. But again, this was ultimately ruled out because there was no substantiating evidence. One of the more significant developments in the case came nearly a year after Jill Dando's murder, when a man named Barry George, who was a local resident with a history of criminal behavior, was arrested. Barry George lived just 500 yards from Dando's home and had quite a troubled past that included different convictions for attempted R-wording and indecent assault. Barry George was described as a fantasist with a low IQ and a reputation for stalking women. When police searched his flat, they found numerous photographs of local women and 4 copies of a Jill Dando memorial magazine. His arrest came after a witness placed him near the scene of the crime the morning of the murder, but obviously he lived 500 feet away, so that makes sense. The key piece of forensic evidence that was used to convict him was a microscopic particle of gunshot residue found in his coat pocket, which the prosecution argued was from the gun that he used to kill Jill Dando. But again, this was over a year later, and that particle could really have come from anywhere. But he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But people had doubts about his guilt from the beginning. A lot of people didn't think that he had done this. And also, a lot of people figured that he had quite a low intelligence, that maybe he wouldn't have been capable of carrying out this type of crime. In 2007, his conviction ended up being overturned and he was let out of prison and acquitted after a retrial in 2008 because forensic experts started to cast doubt about the gunshot residue evidence. Ultimately, he was cleared. He wasn't really ruled out. It's still a possibility that he did it, but most people don't believe that he did. Again, because he just didn't have the IQ of somebody who would be able to carry out such a crime. But at the same time, I'm like, carry out such a crime? Like, this person murdered one of the biggest television hosts in the middle of the daylight and left her body there. Like, it's like not like that, like, intelligent of a crime, especially if he lived 500 feet away. He could have just ran home. I don't know though. I definitely want to hear your guys' theories and thoughts on this. I think that there could be a lot of answers as to what could have happened to Jill Dando. I also think it makes a lot of sense that she could have been investigating something dark. I don't know if it was really necessarily involved within the BBC, but just something dark in general. She was obviously connected to a lot of higher up people in the UK, and she could have known things that she shouldn't have known, and that's always an interesting theory as well. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. But either way, that is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of these unsolved cases. But that is it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, and subscribe for new videos every week, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!